Time to pull up a chair. We've got another great story for you today in the rLounge. Picture it, a wholesome celebration of hard work, and then suddenly your mom decides to make the day all about her. Today in the rLounge, how to survive a one-woman wrecking ball with a superiority complex. My emotionally abusive mom ruined my childhood. I exposed her true personality in front of her family and got her arrested. So I, 28 female, just graduated from medical school, which you'd think would be the proudest moment of my life, right? Well, the memory of my graduation is bittersweet, and it's all because of my mother, 54 female. She spent her whole life making me feel like crap about everything I've ever accomplished. I could never do anything good enough for her. As a child, I can remember being criticized for the way I looked, the way I talked, or how I walked. Even if I managed to do something perfectly, she would still find a way to take a shot at me. Like when I'd make straight A's on my report card, she would say something like, "That's a surprise. You've managed to do something right for once." When I got into medical school, her congratulations for me was, "Let's hope you actually make it through. You know you have issues finishing things." When I got a little older, I tried to push back against my mom. Sometimes I would summon the courage to tell her that her comments were hurtful. She would just gaslight me and make me feel like I was taking her comments the wrong way. "You're so sensitive, Julia. I'm just trying to help you improve. Why can't you take a little constructive criticism?" Nothing I said ever got through to her, and I started to believe that I might truly just be too sensitive. One thing I hated was when my family would come over because she would become a different person entirely. When one of her cousins, siblings, or parents were around, my mother would become a paragon of motherhood. Suddenly she would be sweet, supportive, and loving, and it always made me sick to my stomach. You'd think I would appreciate the break from her normal ways, right? The truth is, I was always painfully aware that her good mom persona was an act, and as soon as our guests or relatives left, good mom would leave too. Then, my normal mom would come back, usually more bitter than before. She always had some fresh criticism in store for me when a relative left. She would tell me some way I had embarrassed her in front of them, like slouching in my seat or not making eye contact when I spoke to them. It hurt so much because it showed she knew how to be a socially acceptable mother, but for some reason, I wasn't worth that to her. When I was a teenager, I had a bit of a rebellious phase. For the first time, I would fight back against my mom's barbs and attacks, but it didn't do much good. She would call me an ungrateful child who didn't appreciate her sacrifices. Sometimes she would cry and say she didn't realize that I thought she was such a monster. Back then I would cry and apologize to her, genuinely convinced that I was being ungrateful and hurtful to her. It was much later, after talking with friends who had normal childhoods, that I realized she was emotionally manipulating me with her tears. When it was time for me to go to college, I was ecstatic. I hadn't realized that I was in a toxic household yet, but I knew I was unhappy there, and I wanted to put some space between me and my mother. I sent out applications to schools in other states and on the other side of the country in an attempt to get as far away as possible. My mother had other plans, though. One evening, she came into my room and sat on my bed. She asked me which schools I was applying to, and I answered her honestly. Without even thinking about it, she told me they were all too far away and gave me 3 nearby schools to apply to. That was it. She didn't even ask me if I liked any of them or if I was willing to look at schools in state. She just took it as a given that I was going to do as she said. I tried to tell her why I wanted to go with schools I'd named, but she cut me off and told me that we both knew that I couldn't do anything right without her, and I needed her to be close. I should have seen it coming, but at the time, she still had me under her thumb. I was unhappy with her, but I was also convinced that she was right. I was incompetent and couldn't make it on my own. What was I thinking? So I caved and applied to the schools she picked, and got into one of them. It was close enough that I could commute from home, which you can bet my mom insisted on, despite my weak protests. So I never got the chance to experience college the way my friends did, living in dorms, hanging out with friends, and learning to be independent. Instead, I was stuck in that same suffocating environment, with my mother chipping away at my self-esteem and controlling my every move. No surprise, the abuse continued through college. Now, when she insulted my appearance, she would imply that no man would ever be attracted to me. She'd say things like, "You'll never find a husband looking like that," or "Who would want to be with someone who can't even take care of herself?" She'd call me fat, say I looked pale, or that I was dressed like a slut or a homeless person. These comments would always come whenever I was feeling proud of how I looked, like if I had just bought myself a cute pair of jeans or followed a makeup tutorial on YouTube. It's like she always knew when I was feeling proud of my appearance, and she was lying in wait to beat my confidence back down again. She was always ready to tear down my academic accomplishments too. If I did well in an exam, she would tell me not to be cocky, or that it was a shock that I was finally doing well. When I did badly, she would have a field day. Instead of support, I'd hear, "Maybe you're not cut out for this," or "Perhaps you should consider a simpler career." It was around this time that the panic attacks started. The stress of college and trying to live up to my mother's impossible standards left me with panic attacks that felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. If I thought too hard about what my mother would think of something I was doing, I would get a panic attack that would leave me doubled over wherever I was. The first time I had one of those panic attacks was when I was shopping for clothes with friends. One of my friends said I should try a top on that would show off my shoulders. Just imagining my mom's reaction to me wearing something like that, revealing, triggered an attack so intense that I honestly thought I was dying. I made some friends in college, and they were the ones that opened my eyes to how bizarre my household was. My friends were shocked by the things my mother did that I considered normal. I remember being surprised when one of my friends called her mom after acing an exam, and her mom was genuinely excited and proud. My friends' parents were supportive, proud, and loving, things I never experienced from my mother. I slowly started to realize that she wasn't being hard on me because she was trying to build me up like she'd led me to believe. She was breaking me down. With the help of my friends, I started taking steps to fix the damage my mother had done to me. I started going to counseling, and we slowly unpacked the full extent of my mother's manipulation and psychological abuse. By the time I was done with college, I realized just how toxic my mother was, and I refused to let her influence my decisions any longer. She realized that I was no longer as malleable as I used to be, so she intensified her verbal abuse instead. It was as if she actually got some satisfaction from seeing me unhappy. By that point, I had developed thicker skin, and therapy had equipped me to remove myself from the situation, or let her words slide off me without me internalizing them. When I applied to medical school, I made sure to pick one that was in another state. My mom was furious and threw her usual insults at me like, "You can't survive without me," and "Don't come crying to me when you fail like you always do." Just like last time, she threatened not to support me through medical school. She swore not to give me a single cent towards my education. But this time I held my ground. I wanted to escape her influence and see who I could become, and moving away from med school was my chance to break free. It wasn't easy. It took a lot of moral support from my friends, but I did it. I found a school across the country, packed my stuff, and left. My mom made good on her threat. She didn't offer a penny towards my medical education, and I didn't ask. Fortunately, I was able to get a full scholarship, which I worked my butt off for over the years, but I had to cover room and board myself. I managed to make it through with the money I saved up from the work online I was doing, as well as loans from my friends. I really couldn't have pulled through without the financial and emotional support that they provided. The distance from my mom gave me the break I needed from her crushing negativity, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I feel like medical school is where I finally started to discover who I was without her control. I made some more friends, got into a relationship for the first time, and started to do better with my studies. Med school was tough, but very rewarding. Of course, my mother didn't make it easy for me. She tried to guilt trip me with phone calls, claiming that I was abandoning her after everything she had done for me. She'd leave messages saying things like, "I knew you would fail me eventually," and "I'm not surprised that you would abandon your own mother like that." But therapy had taught me how to set boundaries. I would limit our phone calls, and when she started her insults, I would let her know that I was no longer interested in talking with her, and I would calmly end the call. By the time I was approaching graduation, I was a much healthier person than I had been before. My mom no longer got under my skin, and I'd built several fulfilling, healthy relationships. I decided to throw a graduation party as a celebration of my perseverance and my success despite my mother's efforts to undermine me. I invited close friends and some family members who had always been supportive. I didn't want to invite my mother, but one of my family members must have told her, and she insisted on coming. I knew it would be a mistake, but I felt like I was more mature now and prepared to handle her jabs. I also wanted to rub my success in her face and prove to her that I had made it despite everything she said. I should have known better. The party had a happy, cozy vibe when it was just me and the guests I had invited. My friends and family showed me nothing but love. Some even bought gifts. I swear I could feel the atmosphere change when my mom walked in. She gave me a forced smile, and there was even a congratulations. Her first words to me were, "This is quaint. I'm surprised you managed to pull this off on your own, Julia." She said that loud enough that a few people turned to look. I let it slide, determined not to ruin my day, and replied as if she'd given me a normal greeting. Throughout the party, she continued her usual routine, using every opportunity she could to throw digs at me. I think she got frustrated that I wasn't taking the bait because she moved on to making comments about me to my guests. I was surprised that she was being so openly critical since she usually pretended to be supportive in public, until I noticed that she seemed to be more than a little tipsy. She'd clearly had quite a few drinks already. Some of my friends who knew about my mother came to check on me to find out if I was doing okay. I reassured them that I was doing fine because I didn't want to ruin the day. I appreciate their concern though, and it made me feel better to know that some people had my back. As the party went on, my mom's behavior became more unbearable. One of my friends told me that she was cornering people now, making disparaging comments about me. She told me that she overheard her telling another friend, I'm surprised that Julia made it through medical school. She could never finish anything as a child. Even though I was ignoring her, she was still trying to provoke a reaction. When one of my friends came to tell me that my mom thanked her for providing handouts to put me through medical school, I decided I'd had enough. She wasn't going to get away with it this time. I picked up a glass and tapped it loudly with a spoon as if I wanted to give a toast. All the conversation in the room died out quickly, and everyone turned to face me. I started by genuinely thanking everyone who had supported me. Medical school was a tough time for everyone, and my friends had been the lifeline that had gotten me through it. I thanked the family members who had shown support as well. But there's someone else here today who has had a major impact on my life, my mother. As I said that, she had the nerve to smile and raise her head higher, as if acknowledging that she had indeed played a huge part of my success. She's been a big part of my life, though not in the way people would expect. She didn't help me through medical school financially, emotionally, or in any way at all. In fact, she did the opposite. Now she was looking at me cautiously. Before that look would have shut me up, and even now it made my stomach tighten, but I pushed on. My whole life, my mom has torn me down and insulted my looks and intelligence. She'd made me feel like I could never be anything without her. When I did well, she would minimize my achievements, and when I struggled, she would flaunt my failures in my face. I spent my whole childhood and a good part of my adult life feeling like I was inadequate. It felt good to finally get these things off my chest in front of my mother and all the people she had been disparaging me in front of. My mom, on the other hand, looked furious, and her face was red and shining from sweat. Everybody was looking at her, and a lot of people were whispering. I told them about how she threatened to withhold a university education from me if I didn't go to a school where she would be able to control me. I told them about my panic attacks and how I needed therapy because of what she'd done to me. I told them that she refused to support me throughout medical school in any way because I wanted to move out of state. Then I told them that through all of this, my mother had insulted me constantly, leaving hateful calls and messages on my phone. I'm sure most of you here have heard some of the comments she's been making tonight. That's only a taste of what she's put me through daily since I was a child. My mom stalked towards me and shouted, "You ungrateful witch!" I visibly recoiled because, I hate to admit it, there's a part of me that's still afraid of her, and because she's never actually hit me before. Luckily, one of my friends from medical school stepped between us, but my mom didn't stop. She tried to push past my friend, and two guys came to hold her back. The four of them struggled for a while until the guys managed to pull her off my friend. My mother shouted all sorts of ugly things at me, and I felt another panic attack coming on. I managed to do my breathing exercises, and I was able to get it under control before it got too bad. My mother was completely unhinged, screaming insults and still trying to break free as she was dragged out of the venue. Someone at the party called the police, and by the time they arrived, my mom was hysterical, screaming and threatening me. The officers pulled my mom aside and tried to calm her down, but she was beyond reason by that point. They had no choice but to physically restrain her and handcuff her. I told the police about my history with her and how she had invited herself to the party and physically threatened me. My friends vouched for me. One of the officers pulled me aside and asked if I really wanted them to take her away. He said he understood that family matters could get a little complicated and that sometimes getting someone arrested wasn't the best way to handle it. I told him that I was sure, and left it at that. She was arrested for disorderly conduct and making threats. Everyone watched as the officers led my mother away in handcuffs. She tried to beg me to talk to them, but I didn't answer her. I just stood and watched as she was bundled up into the police car and driven away. After that, I went full no contact with her. She tried calling a few times and left some angry messages on my phone, but I never replied to them and eventually blocked her number. I didn't return home either. I built a brand new life for myself in my state and made sure she didn't have my address. I didn't know which of my relatives had told her about my graduation party, so just to be safe, I didn't let any of them know where I lived too. I found out later that she had to take mandatory anger management classes and a short stay in jail. Forgive me if I found it hard to feel too bad for her. That was what she deserved for the years of mistreatment. If you asked me, I think she deserved more. I feel vindicated finally get my payback in such a public way. It felt good to stand up for myself, and this felt like the perfect closure to put an end to the old chapter of my life and start a new one. Nothing says I love you quite like a dramatic public meltdown on your big day. Honestly, it takes a special kind of audacity to see your own child's accomplishments as an attack on your legacy of emotional manipulation. I'm sorry, OP. A mom is supposed to be the person cheering the loudest in the crowd, not the one causing a scene worthy of an emergency psych consult. She's supposed to be the rock, not a boulder you have to dodge on your way to success. You worked your butt off for that degree. The last thing you needed was to play therapist to your own mother when it was your moment to shine. Do you have a similar story? We want to hear it. Share it with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today in the rLounge. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time, and put your chair back where you found it.